The world is a cruel place. There's no other way to describe it. I followed the path I was meant to follow, working hard at school, going off to university, getting a job, and spending 30 years doing that job, all because I thought that was what I was meant to do. It's not like I was paid a lot of money. I had enough to have a reasonable life, but nothing more than that. And when you get to the age of 52 and you look around at your lot in life, you start to think, how on earth did things end up so bad? I know bad is a relative term. While many people would have been glad to have what I had, a nice little terraced house in a decent part of town, some savings, and the ability to travel when I wanted to. But I had to work in order to have this life. If I stopped working, that life would come to an end. So even though I was 52 and I'd worked for the 30 years up until that point as hard as I could, I still wasn't in a position to retire and continue the same life. 52 was a turning point for me. A friend of mine had just returned from Thailand where he met someone who changed his world. For the better, I must say. At that time, when he returned, he brought his wife with him, and he was a changed man. I had a few relationships over the years at home, but nothing that amounted to anything other than heartache and betrayal. My friend was the same, and that's why he went to Thailand. I never thought I would go to Thailand until he came back with his wife, and I thought that maybe I needed to go there as well. Not with the intention to try to meet someone, just to see if Thailand could have as big an effect on my life as it had on my friends. 2017 was when I went to Thailand for the first time. That's when I turned 52. I took all my yearly holiday at once, around October, November time, and I would like to believe that I would have a good time in Thailand. I didn't want to go during the craziness of high season, yet I didn't want the lowest of low season either, so it was a happy medium introduction to the country. I was quite a well-travelled guy. I'd never been to Asia before. I had family connections to places in southern Africa, so that's where I spent a lot of my holiday time. I even had plans to retire in South Africa, a country that I loved going to. Yet I also loved Zimbabwe, Zambia, and Botswana. I always found it interesting how different people are drawn to different places, so I never even thought about the possibility of going to Thailand because it was just so far out of my remit. But that changed because of my friend, and I was really excited to go and see what Thailand was like. I was still one of the people who had a very set-in-stone opinion about Thailand and the sorts of people that went to Thailand. Opinions that were drummed into me over years and years of propaganda, fed to me by the sorts of television programs I used to watch. Needless to say, as soon as I arrived in Thailand, there were no opinions that were more accurate than the ones I had now had of my own. Thailand was nothing like people had led me to believe it was. It was far, far better. I was advised by my friend that I needed to spend time in Bangkok and also go to Pattaya. He also said Phuket was nice, but it was more expensive than the rest of Thailand, and it was the sort of place where people went who weren't after the real Thailand. Phuket was the sort of place that you'd hear about somebody going on a 2-week holiday who had never been before and who had no plans to return, and then they talked about how much they loved Thailand. Yet it wasn't really like the Thailand that everybody who knew Thailand loved. But I decided to go anyway just to say I'd been. Bangkok was completely different to what I was expecting it to be. I was expecting some third world backwater, yet what I found was a modern, efficient, and well-run city, which felt quite out of place in such a hot and humid climate. My first impressions were wondering what it was like to have to work in a city like that. Just going from the place you lived to the office would see you completely dripping in sweat if you had to walk or use public transport. I thought that was probably why people liked to use their cars, even though it meant sitting in some of the worst traffic you could ever envisage. But Bangkok was a pleasant surprise. I really did like it there, and I wondered why I'd never been before. I spent most of my time in a hotel in Silom, which was wonderful, and all the modern buildings around there. I felt an immediate connection to Thailand that I'd never felt anywhere else I'd been. I went to Pattaya as well, yet I felt that was too over the top for my tastes. It was a bit too in your face, and I felt uncomfortable there, so I didn't stay long. Phuket, though, that became my favourite place in all of Thailand. And while what people said about it being more expensive was true, it wasn't that much more expensive, and I immediately felt Phuket was a place I could get to know more. I was in one restaurant after being in Phuket for a few days, and it was run by a guy from England. You could tell just how proud he was when he was able to say that he was living in Thailand. He said he had a wife there who helped him run the business, and it was always his dream to move to Thailand, especially Phuket, and he'd made that dream come true, and this was his restaurant. I really respected him for his ability to do that, to just leave everything behind that was so normal and comfortable, and move somewhere that completely shifted you out of your comfort zone. I was starting to think that Thailand was the most remarkable place I'd ever been, and at this point, I'd only been there for just over a week, yet it felt like I knew the country, and then Thailand made me feel different than I'd felt before. If I'd have known when I left that restaurant and just walked into a bar for a drink, if I'd have known what that bar was like, and the girl that started talking to me would become so much more for me, I probably would have turned right instead of left after I went out of the restaurant. Yet these tiny decisions that we make, almost without thinking about them, these are the decisions that can have huge ramifications on our future lives. And me turning left instead of right when I exited that restaurant was when a series of events and decisions would alter the course of my life considerably. To start with, in a great way. Yet when it came to a conclusion, no one, even in their wildest imagination, would have guessed just how far I fell. So that was it when I was in that bar, and that girl came over to talk to me. I knew what happened in Thailand, yet I wasn't aware that that sort of thing happened in Phuket. I'd never been to any of the bars in Bangkok or Pattaya. I wasn't interested in that side of Thailand. I was just interested in how different it was to where I was from. But when I was in that bar, I just thought it was like any other. You go in for a drink. So when she came over to talk to me, I let my guard down. The bar was extremely quiet, and she was behind the bar when I walked in. I just thought that she must have some free time for herself, and she came and sat down and introduced herself, holding out her hand, and we shook hands. She asked me what my name was and what I was doing there. Was it my first time in Thailand? All the typical questions that you would expect to hear. Her English wasn't fantastic, but I could understand it. One thing I found out later was that you had to speak English slightly differently than you would if you were speaking to someone who understood it properly. If you remove lots of the words that you don't need, even though it's incorrect, people will understand you better. Yet I was there speaking in perfect English and she's struggling to understand. And I wouldn't find out about speaking English in a different way until a lot later on. But I finished my beer and I was about to leave, and she asked if I wanted another one. And then she said, "Can I have a drink too?" She smiled at me and I thought, why not? I was happy to be in a conversation with her, and it was interesting to speak to somebody from Thailand. I don't know if she saw me as being a complete newbie and not knowing anything about Thailand or how things worked. But anyway, if I think about it, I bet she latched onto that and tried to take advantage of the situation. She must have known that I had no clue that I was in a bar like that. I thought it was just a bar for drinks, and I think she played on that knowledge because, as nobody else was going into the bar, we were having lots of drinks together, which were all being added to my tab. And instead of doing lots of other exploring that I planned to do that day, I just spent the rest of the day getting quite drunk in that bar with her. Around 7 p.m, a few other girls showed up to work. Then, an hour later, more people started to trickle into the bar. and it still hadn't dawned on me what it was about. The girl I was speaking to was 32, and I wasn't even thinking anything like she could be open to being in a relationship with me. That was the last thing on my mind, and the thoughts of anything like that were so far away that I feel like she tried to become more forward as the hours went by, trying to get me to have an aha moment. I guess I got extremely drunk, and then you could say that the rest is history. The next morning, she's there with me, and I'm thinking, how did that happen? It was completely unexpected. And from then on, we were an item. I have to stress that during this interaction, although I paid for her drinks, I didn't even know that her drinks were more expensive than mine until I got the bill, but I never gave her any other money. It's as if she wanted to make things real and get me to fall for her. I don't really know what her mind was thinking, but that's how I ended up with her. I met her at a bar in Phuket. I didn't even know it was one of those sorts of bars. I didn't know that they had them in Phuket, and I only wanted a drink, but there I was. I only had a week in Thailand, but that morning, all of a sudden, it felt like I didn't have long enough because I wanted to get to know her more. I must say that it wasn't my plan to meet someone on my first trip to Thailand. I wanted to go and see what Thailand was like based on my friends' descriptions, and Thailand was amazing. The fact was, I met her and I liked her, and when she said she had to leave after a few hours in the morning, I didn't want her to, and we just became an item right there and then. I spent a lot more time in that same bar, and then it did twig what was going on there, but it was already too late because I'd already fallen for her. For the rest of my time in Phuket, I went all over the island with her, checking out beaches, going to different restaurants, and learning more about her and this most incredible place. She'd been working in Phuket for a few years. She was originally from a province up north called Nan. I'd never heard of it, and I knew nothing of it, but I did vow to do some research when I got home. She had 2 kids from her old marriage with a Thai guy, but when that broke down a few years ago, that's why she moved to Phuket, because there was no way for her to make any money where she was from, to the level she wanted to be able to give her kids. So I did admire her in that sense, but she was something different, and I loved everything about her almost as soon as we met. I was already thinking about what I was going to do. The thought of having to return home and leave her was making me stay awake at night. I dreaded the thought of not being with her and what she was going to do when I wasn't there. It's crazy how you get so drawn and connected to somebody that you've just met so quickly. It's crazy how our mind works like this, because up until then I'd never fallen for someone like I'd fallen for her. The relationships I had at home were more relationships of convenience. While you might get on with people, you might move in together if it helps financially, but then you get your heart broken. But it was never this overarching feeling of crazy love like I felt for her, and only in a short amount of time. And she knew how I felt for her, I think, and she used that to her advantage, because she didn't want to come across as being a girl who was after money or anything like that, because she never asked for money from me. And she even said, when you go back, please don't send me any money because I want to see you as soon as possible. So she was really trying to drum it home to me that she wasn't interested in anything apart from a relationship. I got the fact that if we were in a relationship and living together, I would be paying for things, but that didn't bother me. The thought of having to send money for her when I wasn't there, that wasn't the type of thing that I would have wanted to do. And that would have definitely removed the shine from what I thought we had. Leaving Thailand was awful. Yet when I got home and back into work, it wasn't too bad. I didn't dislike my job, and it paid a reasonable salary. It allowed me to have the house I had, and allowed me to travel when I wanted to, but I was still quite a way away from any possible retirement. I wasn't about to gamble my future, at least I thought, by moving to Thailand without enough money. When I got back, we were speaking to each other all the time. I just thought, how about I bring her to England to live with me here? Maybe we'd stay for a few years and we could go to retire to Thailand when I had enough money to do that. The thoughts to get her back to England started to excite me, and I asked her how she would feel about it. I knew that we'd only spent a week together, but for me that felt like 10 years, and I felt like I wanted to be with her, and I knew everything about her. I didn't know how she would feel about it, but she said she'd love to as soon as I asked. Then is what we do from there. I spoke to an immigration solicitor about my options. The best course of action would be to get married, that's what they said. Keep proof of all your telephone calls and all your messages, and if you meet the requirements, which are very stringent, then you should get the visa. There was a compulsory English language requirement, which would mean her taking a test. And then it was more to do with, do I have a place to live that's suitable? Do I have a big enough income so that we can't claim public funds? I ticked all the boxes in terms of a place to live and income, so it was more about proving our relationship and her doing the English test. When I spoke to her about what we needed to do, she was more than happy to oblige. She talked about how excited she was about the prospect of marrying me and moving to England. The thing was, we needed to get married, which would involve me having to go back to Thailand. And that was a difficult conversation that I had to have with work. Because I worked for the company for an exceedingly long time, basically my entire life, they were more than happy to allow me some leeway, which I was thankful for. I was able to take off up to a month unpaid without it affecting my job, and because of that, I was free to return to Thailand and get married. I did pay about £5,000 for the immigration solicitor to help me get the visa. I thought that was money well spent, just to make sure all the I's were dotted and the T's crossed. I didn't want to do it myself and make a stupid mistake and then lose out on all the expense of the application and the time. It was quite apparent that they didn't want to give people visas for their spouses to go to England. I always felt that the immigration in the UK targets the wrong people. As far as I was concerned, I was English, my parents were English, my grandparents were English, my great-grandparents were English, therefore I should have the right to simply take my wife to my country, no questions asked. But it doesn't work like that. Flying back to Thailand to get married only 6 weeks after returning was very surreal. I was thinking to myself, am I doing the right thing? I hardly know this girl, but we'd spoken every single day multiple times since I'd been back, and I'd taken screenshots of messages and recordings and everything just to get as much proof as possible. I even had a video camera so that when I arrived at the airport and she was waiting for me, I all had it documented as proof, taking pictures as we went along with it, just as I was advised to do. We didn't have many pictures because we weren't together for that long, but as long as we could prove the relationship was genuine and we met all the requirements, then it should be okay. I think a lot of people get tripped up on the fact about how difficult it is. Yet if you meet the requirements, they will give it to you. That's what I was told. The tourist visa situation is something slightly different, or the visit visa. You can get that, but it's more up in the air as to if you're going to be approved or not. The spouse visa is pretty black and white. We stayed in Bangkok and it was a very strange experience, going to the embassy, going to get married. Now we have a marriage certificate and it's crazy just how quickly things are happening. I don't for 1 second stop to think if it's the right thing to do, getting involved with a girl that I hardly know and taking her back to England and everything I had there. But you don't think about it when you're doing it because you're happy in the moment, and I was happy, so that's why things progressed so quickly. When we were married, we spent a few days on Samui. We wanted to get lots of pictures for the application, and then I got her to book the test she needed to do, the English test, and that was arranged for a few weeks' time. I left and she went back to Phuket. When the time came for her to do the test, she passed it first time. That was a huge relief because that was one of the biggest stumbling blocks to her being able to get the visa. I felt the process was extremely degrading. Mainly so for the English person because that's my wife. I should simply have been able to take her no questions asked, and I still think that should be the case today. They're making it harder and harder, and the income requirements for the English spouse are getting higher and higher, yet I don't think it's in any way justified. It was decided I would go back to Thailand when the application was going to be lodged. It was quite a stressful time for her, and I wanted to make sure everything was done properly. We found it was going to take quite a few weeks, or a few months even, to hear the result of the application, but we lodged it, and the idea was to just spend a week there before I returned home to wait to see what happened. But 5 days later, we were notified that a decision had already been made. I couldn't believe it, because that wasn't meant to happen so quickly. But as we were notified of this, it just so happened to be before closing time. That was a very, very long evening and night and morning before we could go and collect the passport. But there, stuck inside her passport, was a spouse visa. She'd been approved and she'd got it. And all of a sudden, I didn't need to go back and return again. We could go together. And I wasn't expecting it to be that quick. But I guess we just had everything perfectly, so there was no way they could deny it, even if they wanted to. I will give England that. If the law says one thing in terms of the visa situation, if you meet the requirements, they're not going to deny you. They're not going to turn around and ask for documentation that isn't actually part of the requirements, like I've heard so many times that they do in Thailand. So I suppose that's one of the positives. Looking back, if they declined the application, I would have been absolutely devastated. But them declining the application would have probably been the best thing that ever happened to me. I actually had to extend my stay in Thailand slightly, just so we could get everything prepared and go together. I'd not even seen her family yet. That was going to be arranged for the time I came back next time, but we decided to go all the way up to Nan so I could be introduced to her family and she could say goodbye to them and her kids. I feel she respected the fact that I went there and did that, and just let her family know that I was a respectable guy who loved their daughter and would look after her when she was in England. It was such a beautiful part of the country up there. This isn't Isan, if anyone's wondering, but it borders Laos, all the way up in the north, and it was like no place I'd ever been. I've been to lots of places, but up there was idyllic. That's the only word I can use to describe it. We spent 2 days there, and she was upset to leave, and she was in tears as she had to say goodbye. But I said to her, don't worry about it. We're only a flight away. And the idea was always to return to Thailand when I retired, which I planned to do around the age of 60. Back down in Bangkok, I'd taken her to do some shopping, to buy warmer clothes. That was an exciting time for her because she'd never had to wear clothes like that before. She'd never left Thailand before. And we got all that arranged, and a few days later, we went to the airport, and I treated us both to business class tickets direct from Bangkok to London. When we got to England, we were advised to have all the documentation that we had when we applied for the visa, just in case the immigration people decided they wanted to ask questions. This is what we were advised by the solicitor, and that's what we did. And luckily we did, because although I could go in a different queue to her, I went with her just to make sure nothing went wrong. And she went first and handed them the passport. And they're looking at the visa, and they're asking all these questions, and she's starting to get flustered. And I'm standing there like, that's my wife, stop giving her a hard time. She was dragged off to a room, and granted, they did allow me to go with her, and they were asking her questions like, what are you doing here? And then I interrupted and said, can you not see it says spouse visa in the passport and I'm her spouse? What do you think she's doing here? I nearly swore at them, and I guess that they're only doing their job, but they're definitely trying to target the wrong people, 100%. Genuine people who have spent thousands and thousands of pounds doing everything the right way to get the spouse visa, being interrogated like criminals, even though they've already been through the process, is wrong. I don't agree with excessive immigration to England, yet some forms of immigration should be accepted as basic human rights, and some, they should not be able to go there. That's how I see it, but I guess I need to stop talking about that now. But even after everything that happened, it still angers me how I feel my country treated me as an extension of my wife. That's what it was. It wasn't the fact that they were asking my wife all these ridiculous questions. It was the fact that that's my wife and I'm English, leave us alone. 20 minutes later, though, we're already through immigration, and the look on her face as we walked out of the airport into the cold, grey, dull day that was England was the biggest look of horror and shock I'd seen. I could tell how it wasn't anything like she expected, in a bad way. It was worse than she expected, I could tell. But she was putting on a brave face as if to say, this is amazing, what a beautiful country. When actually what she wanted to say is, this is not anything like I thought it was. We had to get the train up to where I was from. Let's just say it was a couple of hours north and leave it at that. And then we got a taxi to my house, and it was a huge mess in the house. I wasn't expecting to return with her. I was expecting to return by myself and then go back in a month or two's time and get her. But it didn't matter, and we dropped off all the things and I showed her around. And I think she was just completely overwhelmed about what England was like compared to Thailand. She said she had a friend who went to England and who had spoken to her about it and told her what it was like. But she said it wasn't anything like she was thinking it was going to be. And because of that, she just went to bed at 4 p.m. and slept all the way until the following morning. I had a few days before I needed to go back to work. So I just showed her around. I took her to visit my friend who had his Thai wife, and she felt more comfortable to be able to speak Thai. Yet, when I think about it, if I'm looking back at everything that happened, her interacting with other Thai people in England was the worst thing that could have ever happened to me. She saw how things were in England, and how in England, even though she was a foreigner, she was basically having the same rights that I had. Whereas in Thailand, she was so used to foreigners having no rights, and she expected that to be the case in England. But I think she was extremely emboldened by all these realizations she was having. But this would come quite a few months later. I can remember the feelings of setting off to work when it was time to get back to that, saying goodbye to my wife, and I was enjoying myself. I was happy to go to work and return home to an incredible wife. And in the early days, she always prepared a meal for me when I returned. And she was just everything I thought my wife would be. We had agreed that we would send her family a little bit of money every month for her children. But aside from that, she never really demanded anything, and life was great. This went on for a good year, probably the best year I'd had. And throughout that time, I think our relationship is going from strength to strength. We didn't know each other that well when we got into the relationship, but it felt now like we'd been together for years and that we were the great couple we were. It was around the start of 2019, though, that she started to look bored. She wasn't really doing anything, so it did make sense then why she was bored. I would get up early to go to work and come back quite late, and she'd just be in the house all day. And that was when I asked her if she'd be interested to try to find a job. Probably the biggest mistake I ever made. I hoped she would say no, if I think about it, but she said that would be great if she could get a job and not be bored. The fact that she could legally work on the visa she had, just like anybody else, I think that even more emboldened her, and she didn't even realize until I told her that she could. She had kept in touch with my friend's wife, and we occasionally met up together. And the idea was, why don't you get a job at a Thai restaurant? There were quite a few in the local area, and they all seemed to want to employ Thai people. And the fact that my wife was perfectly legal in terms of her visa, it could be a good thing for her. I thought she would be able to make friends. I thought she would have a better life because of it, and I thought she would be happier. I didn't know that would be the cause of everything going wrong. Not long after we talked about it, I guess around March time, she'd got a job as a waitress at the local Thai restaurant. She worked the lunch shift to start with. It was a part-time job, and about a 10-minute walk away from the house, so it wasn't too bad. She wasn't able to drive, so it needed to be close by. She worked from 11 a.m. until 4 p.m., 5 hours a day, 5 days a week, and she was always home when I got back. She probably worked there for only 1 to 2 weeks when she called me on a Friday and said she's staying late and she's going to be going out with her friends from the Thai restaurant. I didn't think that was a bad thing, but I should have known what it could lead to. I arrived home that Friday around 6:30 like I usually did, and I expected to see her back around 9 p.m. 9 p.m. comes round and I'm just watching TV, then 10 comes round. I tried to call her, she doesn't answer. Then I guess I fell asleep on the settee, and I'm woken up around 2 a.m. and she stumbles in completely hammered. She's smiling and laughing and can hardly walk, and she's really drunk. She collapses on the settee next to me and falls asleep. I had to just go upstairs to bed, and I went down in the morning and she was still there. She woke up not long after and had the worst hangover she ever had, she said. I asked her where she went and what she did. Did you have a good time? She just said she went with those Thai people to a club and some of the friends that they had as well, and it was great. This didn't bother me at all, I need to say. It was a one-off and that was fine. She wants to see her friends once a month or something. Who am I to stop her? I went to see my friends occasionally, but not very often. Yet there is a point where something is acceptable and something is not. And next Friday she did the same thing. And then she went out on Saturday as well, and it was like she didn't need me. She was making money in the restaurant, which for her was great because she didn't need to pay any of the bills for anything. I think she was on about £40 a day plus a few tips, so just over £200 a week, including tips. She was getting 1,000 a month. I earned an awful lot more than that, but that money was hers to keep and do what she wanted with, and it seemed like all she wanted to do was go out with her Thai friends. This went on for a few months, and I was getting very concerned. She was getting that drunk, there were all kinds of things that could be happening that I didn't want to think about. When I spoke to my friend about his Thai wife, he said his Thai wife doesn't work and there would be no way that he would let her, because if he did let her, that could be a turning point in their relationship. He said he'd spoken to lots of people who said that that's the most important thing. If you're taking your wife from Thailand to England, while you want to give her freedom to make friends and have a good time, you have to be careful if they're getting involved with other Thai people who come from similar backgrounds to them. Because lots of them will end up getting back into their old ways as a way to make up for not being in Thailand. And that seemed to be exactly what was happening to my wife. One time, she didn't even come back. She came back about 9 a.m. in the morning, looking very sorry for herself. I'm not trying to be overbearing or controlling, but I've got an awful lot invested in this relationship, and she's my wife now, and because of that, I wanted to make sure things didn't go downhill. I decided one Friday I would have a day off work. I hadn't had a day off in a while, and I went to the Thai restaurant for a meal when she was working there. She was just working normally, that wasn't the problem. Yet it's when the end of the shift is coming up, she starts to have a drink, and some of the other girls that work there, who are Thai, and I assumed married to English people, start having a drink as well, and then they're talking about where they're going that evening. I spoke to one of the other girls there and said, "Whereabouts does your husband live? What does he do?" She looked at me and said, "No, I divorced my husband a year ago and I stay by myself now." And then another girl said the same thing. And there were 3 other girls working there, one of them my wife. But the 2 other girls were still married, yet they didn't seem to be as keen on the party life as my wife was. I felt like if I wasn't careful, everything could come crashing down around me. But my wife said that she wanted to go out with her friends that Friday, and I didn't want to stop her. Again, she came back the following morning. I don't know where she stayed or what she did, but I knew something was wrong because this just wasn't like her. As soon as she got involved with other Thai people in England, that was when I noticed a big change in our relationship. Halfway through 2019, this is happening all the time. And it was around then that I had to talk to my wife and say that I wasn't happy with just how much she was going out and seeing other people from Thailand, going to clubs, and we were married. I did find out that she was doing an awful lot more than that when she was going out. She was meeting people and cheating on me. Yet I only found that out when one of the other girls who worked in the restaurant, when her husband talked to me about it. His wife was one of the girls who didn't really like going out very often, but she did occasionally, and sometimes her husband would go, and he said that he'd seen my wife being very friendly with another guy, an English guy, and they left the club together. That's all he said, but I guess I knew what that meant. I couldn't believe how things had turned sour so badly. I didn't know how to confront my wife because of everything that had happened. She was my wife, and all the stuff that I had could be in jeopardy. But that's what I started to do, and I started to panic. I was starting to think, what could I do? I knew that if I wasn't careful, things could turn out badly for me. But I did decide to confront my wife on what this guy told me, to see what she said. I put it to her in a way like, if you admit to what happened, I won't be angry and I'll overlook it. But I would like you to stop going out all the time. Once a month is okay. But she refused to admit, saying, "Don't worry about it. I'm just having a good time." But it was too excessive and it was going on, and it felt like we weren't even husband and wife anymore. And this was all because she got a job at a Thai restaurant and started mixing with other Thai girls, 2 who had already divorced from their English husbands and who had gracefully brought them to England for a better life. The 2 other girls, though, they were very respectful of their husbands and didn't do anything that they shouldn't have done. Yet they did go out occasionally. But my wife mixed with the wrong people. People who failed her, with all kinds of crazy and wild ideas about what she could do, and she trusted and believed them more than me. And it became apparent that this was the case, and she went off to work one Friday and didn't return home until Sunday evening. Everything that transpired next was an awful lot of bad luck. I knew that my relationship was likely over, and I knew that she still had a lot of validity left on her visa. You get 2 years and 9 months for the first application, which you have to change to indefinite leave to remain when you're in the UK. I was thinking I would surprise her with an amazing trip to Thailand to some beautiful hotels close to the time when her visa was due to expire. And then I'll start talking about maybe building a house in her town, and then her visa lapses, and then she's not going to be eligible to get another one, and she wouldn't be able to go back, and therefore I would be able to protect myself because of it. The problem was, there was about a year left on her visa, so she could enter the UK anytime she wanted to during that year. But from then on, I knew my relationship was over. But I was happy to just let her do what she wanted to do, on the understanding that I'm never going to do anything to stop her having a good time, and maybe she will be okay with me because of that. This was around halfway through 2019, and the plan to go back to Thailand in 2020 and somehow make it so that she's not able to return to England because the visa expires. You might think that's cruel or manipulative, but all I wanted to do was protect what I had, my house, my savings, and everything, because when I went to England with her, I thought that it would be best to be together. I never thought that she would start getting friendly with people who I wouldn't want her to be friendly with, and doing things I wouldn't want her to do. My friend, who also had a wife from Thailand, never had this issue because his wife didn't mix with the wrong people. Yet this is one of the biggest things I've since learned happens to lots of guys from England who get married to girls from Thailand. When they go back to England with them, some of them get involved with the wrong people and start getting back into the life they left in Thailand and doing things that are nothing but bad for the husband. It happens so many times, and I've spoken to so many guys that this has happened to. I've made it one of my missions to try to reach out to as many guys as possible, because if we can warn people about the dangers of taking their wife to England, or I guess any other country as well, then that will be one step to fixing the pain that I feel. But this was my plan, and time goes on, and I'm not seeing her very much, and I told her I've got an amazing holiday booked for halfway through 2020. I showed her the hotels and the plane tickets, and they were business class, and I said that I really liked the idea, after speaking to some people, of building a house in her village. Do you think that would be something that you'd be interested to do? As soon as I said that, she didn't go out as often, although she still went out, and it was as though she had to cling on to me for that possibility. Yet it was my intention to somehow get her visa to lapse. She wasn't the sort of person who understood anything to do with visas and expiration dates. Everything was left to me, so it wasn't going to be a problem if we went. COVID put a stop to that. Couldn't go back to Thailand, couldn't do anything. My plan had failed, and that led to everything going wrong. Between lockdowns and reopenings and restaurants opening again and being allowed to go out, our relationship deteriorated rapidly, even quicker than I thought possible. Perhaps it was because I was just so jaded about the situation, or perhaps it was because she met somebody else. How many somebody else's, I don't know, but one day I arrived home from work and I'm just watching TV and she's not there, and there's a knock on the door. It was her and another guy, just saying I'm sorry, but I'm going to be staying with him now and I want to take my things. This guy looked considerably more bulky and strong than I was, so I think she brought him as some form of intimidation towards me. But I knew things like this would happen at some point, yet I didn't know it would be as visceral as it was. Now it was a question of protecting my things, but in England it doesn't work like that, does it? While I knew that my assets that I had before the marriage weren't guaranteed to be divided, there were so many cases where certain considerations were taken which were to the detriment of the person who had these assets, and I contacted a solicitor very quickly as soon as this happened. I had proof that she cheated on me, yet I would never have guessed she was the sort of person that would claim domestic violence when it never happened. I was the least violent person in the world, and when everything was coming to a head and this happened, I just broke down in tears as if to think, how can you say something like that? And why is it that more often than not the girl is believed and the guy is not? I couldn't believe that, and I told my solicitor that it wasn't true. I made the case that when she started working at the Thai restaurant, she started going out all the time, coming back drunk, or not coming back for days at a time, and I'm putting up with it and allowing her to live her life. She put it that the reason she's going out all the time is because I was violent towards her, which wasn't true, in the slightest. But guess who came out on top? The poor little innocent Thai girl who had been ripped out of the country she loved and brought to England. That's not the case at all, but let's just say I lost half of everything I had, even the stuff I had before we were married, and that was my worst nightmare. I had to sell my house, divide the money. I did manage to squirrel away about £20,000, but that was a small portion of everything, but not much of a comfort. Losing about £180,000 is not very fun, and to think that she got it is even worse. I guess I still have some money, but I've completely lost faith in people, the system, my own country, and basically the whole world if something like that is allowed to happen. Retirement seems further away than ever, yet I think what I will do is just completely give up on the fact of getting into a relationship again. I've made it my mission to warn other guys that taking your wife to England could cost you an awful lot more than the plane tickets and visa application fee. If the marriage was in Thailand and it broke down, I would probably be guaranteed that my assets were still protected. Yet because we were in England, and England gave her so many more rights than I would have had if I was in Thailand, all of a sudden she was emboldened to do things that she would never have done in her own country. The very bad influence from the girls that worked in the restaurant, both of which had divorced their English husbands, had led her down that path. And the fact that she met this other guy, who she's no longer with anymore, she's actually with somebody else now. Yet I don't know how a guy would look at a girl who's divorced somebody and taken all his money and think, oh, this is a good idea to get involved with someone like that. If you're a guy and you're talking to a girl who said, oh, I just got divorced from my ex-husband, he paid for everything but I took half of everything, surely that's an indication to simply stand up and walk away and say I'm not interested. That's what I'd do. That's what I'd recommend anyone to do. But it's too late for me because I lost all that. But it's not too late for anyone who's thinking about doing what I did to stop doing it and think carefully, because it's a whole different ballgame when your wife is in England versus Thailand. You're going to be letting yourself in for a world of hurt. Granted, you might be lucky and your girl might be great, but even if you're 99.9% sure she is, there's still a chance that she's not who you thought she was. Even 20 years later, this could be the case. So be careful, that's all I'm going to say. Don't take your spice back to your own country, unless you put things in place to make sure that if she does something that she shouldn't, she doesn't get anything at all.